This show may contain explicit language and/or spoilers. Where we're going, we don't need roads. Carpe diem, seize the day, boys. Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. Good morning, Vietnam! I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore! They call it a Royale with cheese. I've always depended on the kindness of strangers. You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? Shaken, not stirred. They call me Mr. Tibbs. I'll have what she's having. Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room. I am serious, and don't call me Shirley. You make me want to be a better man. I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way. Go ahead, make my day. You can't handle the truth. I'm walking here. May the force be with you. To infinity and beyond. They're here. Are you talking to me? Yes, we are, because this is the greatest movie of all time podcast. Welcome back to the greatest movie of all time podcast. This is episode number 10, Slumdog Millionaire from 2008. I am Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
And tonight, as I mentioned at the top here, we are reviewing a movie that won Best Picture in 2008. Now, just before we kind of get off to the top, what is your relationship to this film?
Watched it about, right after it came out. It was, I think I may have even gotten it in before the Academy Awards, and enjoyed the film. At the time, we had a lot of different exchange students, so we had a couple of kids, I think, from India in the area, and so had some knowledge of India. India was a rising economic force at that time, and just kind of, I guess that's what initially interested me in the film.
So, I mean, part of the background of this film is that it's the first real film that got recognition coming out of the Toronto International Film Festival, which I've highlighted just on a personal basis between you and I. I talk about it all the time, but that often has a kind of harbinger effect or foreshadowing effect going into the award season. That usually the one that ends up winning the audience award tends to get nominated for Best Picture. And this was the first one that really became a factor. It was the first one that won the audience award that really kind of moved forward and ended up winning Best Picture in the end. And for me, this was the same year as a few other films that I really liked. Frost Nixon, which I didn't even watch until way after the fact. Gran Torino, which I think is Eastwood's last really great film. Then this was also the year of The Dark Knight, which won a couple of awards that year. But I don't think anything kind of hit the cultural resonance quite in the way that this did. This kind of was that whole underdog narrative that maybe even if people hadn't seen the movie, and a lot of people did, this was one that at least was part of the pop cultural reference point for probably about a good year, even after it was done. I mean, this set off kind of a unknown area of the culture for a while, and it was getting reference points all over the place. I know famously it's referenced probably a half dozen times in The Big Bang Theory and several other shows that of that time. So I do think it had a impact in that way. I don't know if it's held up over time in the same way, and if people remember it quite in the same vein that they did at the time, but at least for about a 12-month period, I think this was one of the biggest movies at the time.
I would say, yeah, that's pretty much the case. And I think it somewhat has lost its luster simply because it's hard to say, or to put it. And I understand your view of the movie probably differs from mine, because movies, in order to really have an impact, have to move us in certain ways. And
Sure.
if they touch a certain aspect, I mean, you grew up
Well, we
in the
talked about
house.
that last week, the emotional impact of, something that true art speaks to us in an emotional level.
Well, you grew up in a house where it was a lawyer and a professional. Your mother being a professional at the time, different other career opportunities, but now working as or in my office as a representative and office manager. So you don't have that. Okay. I grew up with a high school dropout as a father and a mother who barely passed high school. They were subsistence people, very low middle class. And my whole life, I had to listen to people who kept telling me I couldn't do things because I didn't have the money, I didn't have the connections, I didn't have um, the uh, the uh, the smarts, the skills, you name it. I've always been told that I couldn't. So that's why this film speaks to me. It's you have a purpose. In this case, it was to get Latka or Latka,
Latika.
Latika, excuse me. Um, and everything derived towards that goal. Well, I mean, everything I do professionally in some part is because somebody told me I couldn't do it. So I guess more than anything, my life has been based on, yeah, up you too. And so to that extent, this speaks to me. Here's a kid from nowhere who's a slum. And, all through school, through high school and college, when I studied international relations, we talked about India and the caste system that was in place in India. And it is extremely poignant yet today. It's only started to break down as people with or by their skills have become the nouveau rich.
Well, it's broken down because they've absorbed a lot of capitalistic principles and market ideas. Like the real breakdown of class system in that way is capitalized tendencies. Where, I mean, even I was reading an article from Buffett the other day that the difference in the market value of somebody who was super athletic 100 years ago, where they were a farmer, isn't nearly the same as the top 1/100th of 1% who can dribble a basketball really well today. Where like LeBron is nothing 150 years ago, except a really great laborer. Today, his market skill is extraordinary, and he can hone in on one particular thing. Like in the same way, you're getting a lot of difference, and you're even seeing some of the advancement from when he's a young boy, even to when he's, in his teens, kind of the development of India going forward, just from the early 90s, late 80s to the middle 2000s. And obviously that's even changed up until this point where they're an extremely burgeoning economy.
But it's still, and it's not just India, it's every place. And that's what speaks. Any capitalist country, even, India was more stratified than most, but it's still in existence even to this day in the United States, because I have a very good friend, very well, his nephew was recruited to play football at Harvard. And when he went to talk to the dean of the department he wanted to be in, the dean reached into his desk and he pulled out a old-fashioned Rolodex. And on this Rolodex, he said, I have about 5,000 names of alumnists who are in your department, who all I have to do is pick up the phone and call. And because you're a Harvard football player, they will help you find a job. And that's the advantage of Harvard. And that's the advantage of having money and prestige and getting into the right schools. It's not the education, because quite frankly, I would stack a Harvard education up against the University of Wisconsin, the University of Minnesota. I mean, there's maybe certain aspects, certain professors that are better, but it's really the context and the social aspects of it that makes the difference. And that's what's going on. This film specifically, it not only breaks the barrier, it does it by putting money in the kid's hand. So not only does he get to beat everybody and overcome it, he comes out on the other side being the rich kid who can now dictate some of his own future.
Well, and I did go through some of the numbers on this, okay? So even though, by comparison, the amount of money that he wins is actually significantly less, if not, or it equates to about $432,000 American. The difference in the cost of living day to day in India by comparison to where we live in Wisconsin. So the average cost of living is about $51,000 per year for an average family. The average cost of living per month in India is about $73. And so by comparison, you could live about 19 years if you literally just spent down $1 million. If they handed you $1 million check, you could live 303 years off of the $432,000 that they were given. So he has become not only extremely wealthy, but extravagantly wealthy.
Well, and a celebrity. He's now probably one of the most famous men in India at this point in time. And he basically could do whatever he wanted because people will latch on to him because of his fame.
But the whole point of the movie is not that. He honestly doesn't care about it and almost throws it away. Like, the celebrity status probably would have been there. He might have gotten endorsements or whatever because he was the guy on TV and got up to that last question. But as we'll even come around, like, he even smiles because he doesn't know the answer to the last question and just guesses because the money doesn't matter. It's just being in a place where he thinks he can reach out and, make an appeal to the woman he loves.
Yeah, I found that ironic because the whole thing, he knew the answers based upon events in his life. And of course, the one answer, the last answer, he can't get because the event in his life is the teacher throws the book at him. Okay. So he never gets to read it.
Okay, so here's the other thing about that. He doesn't know all of the answers. Half of them are seemingly guesses. And even the one where he's fed the answer on the second to last question, he intentionally tries to get it wrong in order to subvert the other guy and ends up getting it right, which ends up, being the cursor for the entire movie that then at that point he accuses him of cheating. Yeah. So I think some of the basic nuances in the story structure do break down quite easily in this movie, but ultimately you're going for the romantic side of it. And the first part at least sucks you in, even if it's a little bit disjointed in its storytelling element. It doesn't really bear out and doesn't keep a lot of consistency sometimes, but there are some other elements that I'm sure we'll get through. So, all right. Before we get too far, just for anybody that's been paying attention, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the plot summary, which normally I do a little bit sooner than this. But as 18-year-old Jamal Malik, played by Dev Patel, answers questions on the Indian version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, flashbacks show how he got there. Part of a stable of young thieves after their mother dies, Jamal and his brother Salim survive on the streets of Mumbai. Salim finds the life of crime agreeable, but Jamal scrapes by with small jobs until landing a spot in the game show. So we'll just give the first part of this before we get into some of the bigger categories. But what is this movie about?
Love transcending class and obstacles, and class being or having the opportunities or being granted opportunities to advance. But to some extent, love being even that, you know, I guess you want to put it in a nutshell, a good woman can really push you along the way.
Maybe mine's a little bit more simplistic version of it, and I didn't quite take the same angle on it. Mine was a fairy tale romance mixed with the hard reality of two poor Muslim kids from India. Because really, the entire element of this story is fanciful or fantastic in its element. I mean, the kid gets almost a 1 out of a million shot to be on the show to begin with. And even though there was some algorithm or whatever that they won in order to figure out exactly when to time to call to be on the show, but also having all of the right answers due to all of the circumstances in his life. And despite all of the problems that go wrong, in the end, he still gets the girl, and they're able to be together, and all of it ends up being happy in the end for the two of them. Like, I mean, at its core base, it's a fairy tale romance.
Well, you want to know what it is? We haven't gotten to that film yet. This is High Noon in India.
Is it?
I think it is. Ultimately, he's trying to get through a horrible series of events, his life, ultimately achieving victory and being able to walk off into the sunset with the girl.
I mean, I feel that's a bit of a stretch, but okay. I don't think it lays over. I see where you're going with it. I don't know if I'd make the same claim, but all right. So before we get into the other categories, we'll just take a quick break, and we'll be right back. And now I want to tell you about Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It gives you smart creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone, tablet, or computer, and helps you distribute them to all the major platforms like Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, and more. Plus, they help to hook you up with sponsorships like this one, no matter the listener size, which will help you fund your podcast. And best yet, it's free to use. Look, if you've ever had an itch to talk and express yourself about a topic you like, there is no better time than 2020 to do so. I've started 2 podcasts this year alone, including this one, and we use Anchor for each and every episode. So what do you have to lose? Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started making your own podcast today. And welcome back again. Before we kind of dive into the rest of things, I did want to mention today that, ironically, as we're doing the movie today, the Indian actor Irrfan Khan, who ended up playing the inspector in the movie, actually passed away today at the age of 54 from cancer. He had a very rare form and had been battling it for almost 2 years. So that's kind of... Yeah, he'd been a well-known Bollywood actor for quite a long time. And I do think it's worth mentioning that there are quite a few clear Bollywood tropes that are attempted by this movie. I'll get into a little bit more of that later. But, there are... I think it was maybe a year or two ago, we were looking up, like, the highest paid actors in the world. And, like, 3 or 4 of them are Bollywood actors, like... in the top 10. So there are some very famous and very well-known, high-paid actors that most people in America have never heard of.
Well, there are 1 billion people in India.
I know.
You don't have to do a whole lot, and to have a huge box office.
Well, and take this for example then. That the highest watched sporting event in the world on an annual basis is the cricket match between India and Pakistan.
Yeah, I can believe that.
I mean, it is by far, it outdraws like the Super Bowl 3-1.
Yeah, I can understand that. And really, that's one of the reasons why years ago, after I had read a piece in Foreign Affairs magazine that I was fascinated by India, I kept saying to people, no one would believe me when I would say this, that it wasn't going to be China that was going to be our economic rival in the 21st century. It was going to be India, because not only are there 1 billion people there, they all speak English. So,
well,
for the most
only
part,
to a certain extent.
For the most part, they speak English. So you got 1 billion people who speak English who will work for less money, at least on the low side of it, dealing with Britain and the United States. And really, at this point in time, the international language of diplomacy is English. It is no longer French, as it had been for centuries. If you go anywhere in the world and you have different people who speak different languages. I observed this in Amsterdam. Somebody came up to somebody who was speaking Dutch. He spoke Italian. They looked at each other. They both started speaking in English, and they conducted their business in English.
I'm just gonna say it, like, you may be true on the economics of it. China still can't be understated. And they've had a little bit longer tail at trying to make their economic aspirations part of the general population or of the world. But also, I think China is a more important geopolitical foe at this point than India, too, which I think has more bearing on it. But let's not get into that argument. So, anyway, so best performance would be the first category up. Who did you have down as your best overall performance?
Patel.
Yeah, I did too. I think he's easily the one of the better performances in this whole thing. I don't think we can completely write off, maybe honorable mention of Danny Boyle, but I just thought he was terrific as the kid in this, and this really kind of like jump-started anything. He's been in a few different cultural touchstones at this point. He was also in Lion a few years ago. He's been in some smaller films. He was recently in, I think it was Love Stories or something like that on Amazon. It was a small mini-series. He was on, what was
Newsroom.
that? Newsroom, thank you. So he's had at least a decent little career after this of
so hard to be there too. It just shows his personality, and he's just, I don't know, I just have no care for him whatsoever.
Last minute, when he throws his hat over his eyes and he's like, "Oh, go get me this," and it's just like to the very last minute, he doesn't think about anybody but himself, and he does not draw you in and make you want to be his friend or anything.
Depends on what you define as charismatic. Harrison exemplified the character, and it does pop off the page. To that extent, it's a memorable performance. You will always link Rex Harrison and the character as one and the same, and it is really a defining moment for him as an actor. So to that extent, if that's what you define as charismatic, then yes, I agree. Harrison and the character became one and the same. To that extent, if that's your definition of charismatic, it was. Although there's a reason why Harrison is portrayed throughout the entire play in brown tweed, because there was nothing spectacular about him. He was kind of supposed to be a type of fixture within the room, more or less.
Flames at the moment, but I'm sure there are people with particular feelings.
After we just did Heat of the Night, we're talking about this.
Okay, but him calling him boy and, a couple of slaps to the face in 1967 by being comparison to hooking him up to a literal battery and electrocuting him is a little bit different.
Did we or did we not have a situation where somebody died in custody in the United States in a cell, I believe,
of being the best secondary performance? Because there are a lot of lead people that could potentially do this. But, Dad, who did you have down as your best secondary performer?
I had Armie Hammer, because I loved the way that they played this, the guys that you love to hate.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the Winklevoss twins. I think they did a really good job. Especially, I don't know who played them though, but what I found interesting about them is the way and how they cartooned the character really well. I mean, we ended up hating them towards the end of it. So, and I like the balance between their need to get what they want as rich kids that they are, but on the other side, maintaining the prestige and the status of what it means to be that of Winklevoss. So that's why they never took drastic actions against Facebook, and they never did anything in an immature way. So it was a nice balance of the two.
So you both have Armie Hammer because he plays both of the Winklevoss twins, or the Winklevi, if you will, to refer to some of the script from the movie. But I had down Andrew Garfield. He's not a guy that we've mentioned a lot yet, but this really springboarded him into landing the Spider-Man role and then doing a few other films after that. He hasn't had as much notoriety in the last 3-4 years, particularly since they redid Spider-Man again with Tom Holland. But this is one where I thought he by far is the most sympathetic. He's the guy that the story is kind of told through, and that there's that nice reveal in the middle of the movie that he is the primary one bringing the lawsuit, other than the Winklevi. And so this whole form of betrayal, it sets up the second half of the movie, where why did the relationship fall apart? Particularly if you come into this movie without knowing too much of anything else that was a part of this, as at least I did at the time. I was not familiar with any of this story really until such time as the movie came out. So that takes us to our most charismatic. Brendan, who did you think basically stole every scene?
I'd probably say JT again. I just like the way that he grooves. I like the way that he takes control of a lot of the scenes and how he interacts with, whether it's the women in the scene or whether it's the way that he sells Zuckerberg on the dream and how to build better product. I just like the way that he cartooned Sean Parker there, so I'm really happy with his work.
Okay. I really don't have any knowledge of Sean Parker really outside of this, so but I have a certain level of a man crush on Justin Timberlake, and I'm not afraid to admit that one. But circling back to Dana's point, I think just about every man on the planet would feel that they were more confident and better off if they looked like either Timberlake or maybe Brad Pitt, DiCaprio. So that's not a really a strong confidence
John Stamos.
point. Yeah, okay, there's another one. John Hamm. So, but Dad, who did you have down as your most charismatic?
Boy, that was a little difficult for me because I didn't know if anybody. I guess JT is going to probably be the most charismatic because just by the fact of how he played the part, which was almost an operator throughout the whole thing.
Well, he tries to be the smooth talking kind of. He's almost portrayed somewhat as a con man, especially because most of his character is told through Andrew Garfield's testimony after the fact. But it's one where it was a good ensemble cast, so it's hard to say that anybody really stole the movie in most of their scenes. But because of the way that the story was written, how it was portrayed, and what he came out of it, I'm going to say Andrew Garfield, because I literally think just about every scene he's in, he pops off the screen and is by far the most compelling of any of the characters as far as my opinion goes. All right, so we're going to move on to best scene here. If either of you has a comment, I'm just going to try and run through a list of nominations that I have. If I miss any that you'd like to do, we'll cover that afterwards. But any comments that you have on the scenes, just feel free to kind of pop in and talk about it, anything that you appreciated from any of these particular scenes. So the first scene I have for nomination is the opening scene. I think it's the scene that really sets off everything else and kind of not only sets the tone, but really gives you an understanding of Zuckerberg and his, I guess not value set, but what drives him really. You could say, and my second scene is the face smash scene that is immediately following that. But that whole opening sequence really kind of brings to the forefront exactly who he is and where he's going to go. Because even if you only got a very small description of what this movie was going into it, because I think most people, oh yeah, it's the story of how this guy founded Facebook. Well, okay, but in that description, by the end of it, he's got to create Facebook. So by doing that, how does he get to that point? And this is really the entrance point for most of us as to who this guy is and why he was driven to do this in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the add-on for that, like my favorite scene from the movie was definitely actually building on what you said about the opening ceremony, or the opening scene rather. I think what's fascinating is it humanizes Zuckerberg, right? At the beginning, he's just a nerd who, gets dumped by his girlfriend. He's not some billionaire tech guy. And I think the message here for all of us is that all successes, or a lot of these great projects, start from little nonsensical things. We tend to see Zuckerberg with Facebook and we go, oh, I guess he was always born to build Facebook, when that was not the case at all.
So you mentioned something earlier about all of the lucky breaks that he seemed to have, or all the small things that kind of went into this, and the certain things that all had to happen in exactly the same way. And I would say that's probably true of just about anybody who gets to anywhere in this world, especially with how many people we have and how complicated the world is anymore. Just from that standpoint, it's one of those where if everything isn't exactly perfect, I don't know if he would have ended up in that regard. But now he's there, and so now how does he deal with all of these things that are thrust upon him as a result of it? And I think that's kind of where the term accidental billionaire kind of comes in, is exactly that. All right, so if we have nothing further to add on that one. The next one I had down, other than Face Smash, which that entire sequence and rating girls and the rest of it kind of gives you that, oh yeah, well, okay, this guy really is kind of an asshole type of thing. And so that's why I do agree to a certain extent with you, Dad, that there is that sense or that hint of who his true character is by that. I feel that way, but I've since had much more complicated feelings about Facebook. The next one after that I wanted to mention, though, was Facebook Me. I remember, so I had, and I don't know about you, Brendan, I do know my dad definitely didn't have one, but I had a MySpace page at this point. And about 2006, 2007 is when I first got the thing, and I remembered there was a girl in my class who said something about, oh yeah, you should really look at this thing. This is kind of cool, and it doesn't have all the individuality of MySpace, but the Facebook is actually kind of a cooler thing. And I don't know why that stuck with me. That was like the first hint or inclination I had of this, but I don't remember the last time. I probably still have a MySpace page floating out there, and I have no idea what's on it. I probably should try and look at it and delete it once, but this kind of just took over and became the social media platform, and was such a big revelation, particularly because as the early years that I was going through, or that everybody was going through, was kind of my college years. So this is kind of an interesting situation for this particular thing. But that phrase, Facebook Me, you think about the companies that have their own verb or have their own phrase attached to them. Google it. Facebook Me. He tweeted something today. All of these things have become so ingrained into our normal day-to-day conversation that you recognize the importance they now have in our world moving forward. And they're likely to stay for a significant amount of time.
One thing you have to remember when you're talking about this is the moment in time. Okay, it's much harder for somebody to create the next Facebook right now because there already is a Facebook. You look back on history, the great fortunes were all created because at a moment in time, somebody was in the right place and had the right idea and the right technology, so things fell in place. Bill Gates and came through it with Steve Wozniak at a time, and Steve Jobs. They came out at a time when personal computers were really, Paul Allen, when they were just in their infancy. Okay, you can even go back into time. John Rockefeller started pumping oil and refining it at a time when automobiles and gas-powered engines were just starting, and so he just happened to be in the right place. Andrew Carnegie started Carnegie Steel at a time when steel was just becoming important for the production of railroads and for rail cars and for buildings, and the steel girder was being developed in part by Gustav Eiffel and such. So it happens to be the moment when things are ripe for the next technology, as well as just the sheer accidents of it. And this is when social media was really starting to take off, which is we started to have this period of where there was more isolation of people, and so they were trying to reach out to people through technology because they thought it was really a great way of interacting with more people than the select few you had as friends. It's tended to kind of reverse, but that just happened to be the moment in time.
And for context's sake, this is also the time or the period in time where we specifically get the raising of nerd culture as being one of the dominant forces moving forward. And I do think that provides a certain sense as to why we revere the tech giants a little bit more than we would have, because they've become such big forces in our current environment. They've been somewhat lionized for their industry and what they're actually doing. So, all right. So the next one I had down, The Dinner with Sean Parker. The whole sequence building up to that, I think that's like the pivot scene in the movie. Everything before that is like the Harvard sense of things. And then you leave that dinner and it's okay, my world is completely different. I'm going to move to California with the rest of these guys, and we're going to make Facebook this bigger deal. We're taking all of Sean's advice. We're getting into these angel investors, and all of these other things start to flow. But it pivots off of that one particular scene. And it's, I guess, best signified by the fact that it ends this particular dinner where you can see the resentment because it's being told by Andrew Garfield primarily in that particular sequence, where Sean Parker at the end of it says, you should just call it Facebook. Drop the. And that's like the significant part of it. And, Facebook is cool. The Facebook isn't. And you kind of see where the true pivot of this movie is. So I think it's a significant scene that sticks out particularly for me. All right. The next one I had up, forced cannibalism. If there is an indelible moment for anybody that's watched this movie a few times, and I completely forgot about this because I haven't watched this movie in several years, but it's the whole sequence of Eduardo being found out by the school newspaper of feeding chicken to his chicken. It's one of the few funny moments of this particular movie.
No, it's funny. I actually forgot about that scene. It's good that you brought it up.
It was rather funny because you can just see how a lot of times, especially on college campuses, so much is made of so little.
So I also want to highlight that one because it's another one where some of these movies you'll throw out something that's comical or have an anecdote or something to that effect, where you're going to have something thrown in that doesn't make sense with the rest of the movie. The fact that not only is this comical and that they throw this in, but they keep bringing it back around in multiple times because it's one of the sticking points in the whole lawsuit conversation. And Eduardo brings it up in the next scene I'm going to mention when he's forced out. And he blames Mark for all of the animosity because he feels like Mark has been trying to torpedo him for a while. And that was one of the first real shows of evidence that that was the case. So we'll move forward into the next one. I've now basically alluded to it, but Eduardo being forced out is probably the most climactic scene of the movie. It's not the final. There's probably about 15 or 20 minutes after that. But I think that the movie really, because for most of this is kind of a buddy journey adventure movie up until that scene. And that's why the whole betrayal thing in the middle of it, that's kind of part of the reveal, again, especially if you were like me and didn't have any context coming into this movie, ends up working so well for this particular script and how it was written.
Well, really, it is a climactic scene. And I guess what you have to understand about that scene, I actually understood it a little differently because, I mean, I've created a business. And what you sometimes will have is people that are instrumental in starting the business and getting it going. At some point in time, they reach a point where their talent and skills do not fit with where you're going with this any further. And are you doing yourself or them a favor by continuing to allow things to lag and to just skate by?
Can't put ourselves in that kind of body.
Yes.
So, all right. I just had 3 quick ones for funniest line. Elliot, he's a man from outer space and we're taking him to his spaceship. Greg, well, can he just beam up? This is reality, Greg.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, that's just basically poking fun at Star Trek in a movie where you're suspending the abnormal anyway, but oh God, Elliot? What? Elliot. I taught him how to talk. He can talk now. Wait, can you say E.T.? E.T.? E.T. Ha ha! E.T. 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 Be good. Be good. I taught him that too. I don't know if that's funny so much as, like, again, that's the moment where Gertie really connects with him more or less. And then the final one, which has to have an assist for like the physical humor. So if you haven't seen the movie, it doesn't work as well for you. But Gertie, here he is. Mary bops E.T. with the refrigerator door. Here's who? The man from the moon. But I think you killed him already.
Yes. I do love that scene. That the mother is completely oblivious.
Well, given the example that we usually have to go to.
I'll let you have that one. Wow.
Well, she doesn't listen to the podcast anyway. So it doesn't
That's
matter.
true. She claims she doesn't need to because she comes home and usually catches the last part of our recording.
All right, so we'll go to the rubric grading. So in my initial grade, I had Legacy higher, and I've just slightly knocked it down because there is a circulating animus that the story for this movie is a bit plagiarized from an Indian writer, and even a friend of Spielberg's, fellow celebrity director Martin Scorsese, even credits that some of this is ripped off. Spielberg has vehemently denied this, and gone on many times about how he didn't take anything from this other guy, but There are some direct plot lines from that particular thing. I also think that the further we've removed ourselves, like, had this been about 15 or 20 years ago, this movie would be like still celebrated. I think it's lost a little bit or tapered off as we've gotten a little bit further away from it. I think it does have a certain legacy, but I don't know if it works as well as it did with the audience.
There's a certain element of this film that when you watch it again, it's saccharine. It's overly sweet. And to that extent, I think that modern culture has been a little more cynical.
Well, look at the times that we're currently going through and the environment, and art usually reflects its environment. And I think we've gotten a lot of anti-heroes, much more layered and flawed characters than we used to. And we treat the movies less as an escapism than we used to. So,
well, I mean, we could make this more, or it would be more poignant if, for example, in addition to E.T. going home, they banish certain Confederate general statues.
I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole on the podcast, and you know it.
Yeah, well, I don't have a problem with it, so.
I know. All right, so I gave it a 9. I knocked it down. I originally put this as a solid 10.
I would go 9.5 because it is. I mean,
all right, I'll even come up to it.
All you have to do is say E.T. and the film is how old?
38 years old.
38? 38 years old, and you say E.T., everybody yet today knows exactly what film you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it's still widely known. There's still elements of it that are part of the pop culture lexicon. I think it's had a tail. I just don't know.
They did a Super Bowl commercial about it this last year.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, all right. I for a couple of small come downs, we'll go to 9.5 collectively then.
Well, let's put it this way. There's nothing original in humanity anymore. Between Shakespeare and Chaucer and all the other writers, it's really difficult to come up with anything that's not at least somewhat plagiarized anymore.
Yes and no, but that's a much larger discussion than you and I can take on for like best original ideas or something. One of these like specialty podcasts you and I want to do as a potential series.
I've got other ones I want to do before I try and tackle that one, that greased hog.
Fair enough. Impact significance. I had it as a 9.5. I think I could even go higher.
I'll go 9.5 simply because I keep the perfect score for something that absolutely has.
Like, honestly, and this is one where the impact at the time, you do the convergence of critics, audience response, and then like the trifecta of like winning the award season. The one that I would reserve, even though I don't care for the film all that much, because I find it to be too sappy, which is weird for me because I usually like all of those, but for whatever reason, this convergence doesn't work for me. But Titanic.
Okay.
It won Best Picture. It was critically acclaimed, and like everybody and their mother saw that movie, and it was part of like a big explosion at the time. You don't get a lot of there isn't a lot that's going to come out right now that is going to be like the biggest movie of all time, box office wise, that everybody's going to see, and it's going to win all the awards and critic response.
Yeah, I suppose, but
I will say again, the fact that this was re-released twice, it had re-releases on VHS, that does add to the legacy, but the impact on it alone, the quote that you got from Richard Attenborough who won Best Director and Best Picture that year in '82 for Gandhi. I know you have your own issues with that for that particular year, but he thought for sure he was going to lose to E.T. So I think that in the moment, the fact that this set a record for the most weeks. I mean, this movie was out from June to Christmas because it kept oscillating between number 1 and number 2 at the box office for months.
Yeah.
So the impact it had, the amount of people that saw it, the just box office acclaim that this movie had, and I still think there are a lot of people that grew up on this movie. I think for what it was at the time, it has to be at minimum a 9.5.
Which is why I'm giving it a 9.5, because 1981 is when I really started getting into the Best Picture nominees. And in '82, I saw all the Best Picture nominees except E.T. I just had no interest in it when I was this would have been my senior year of high school. I just had no interest in it. I went and saw Gandhi. I saw Tootsie. I mean, to be honest, I still argue to this point that Tootsie was the best film that year.
To be fair, that Best Picture race has 4 films we're eventually going to cover on this podcast. Tootsie, this or E.T. here, and frankly, it probably has more because that's also the year of Sophie's Choice.
Yes.
But that wasn't nominated for Best Picture.
No.
Gandhi and The Verdict.
Yes, which I thought The Verdict was extremely well done, and in fact, one of Paul Newman's better performances.
So, all right. What did you have down for novelty?
I had down a 8.5.
Okay, so I had a 9, and simply there are certain elements to this movie. I could probably be knocked down. This is the second. This is the second big sci-fi alien first encounter type of film that Spielberg did. The first one, though, was a very adult version, and this is much more the kids' version. And there's the certain sentimentality that's in this one that I didn't think was apparent in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There are other pieces of this that I thought were unique, but I can't put this by itself completely that high up.
It has to do with the package, because by this time we'd had Star Trek from the 60s. We had all of those schlock films from
by the time E.T. came out, we had 2 Star Wars films.
Yeah. It's just not that novel. The novel is the package of it, which is to make a sci-fi fantasy into a story of innocence and love. That's where the novelty lies. It's not in the subject matter. It's in how it was presented.
Sure, I'll even go for the perspective point of view and the audience it was trying to reach. Now, I understand that like Star Wars was still somewhat for kids or a more general audience, but the sentimentality and the rest of it was specifically geared towards a younger audience.
Yeah.
Or families for that matter, I suppose. Classicness, other than there are a couple of like weird callbacks like the speak and spell. I didn't really find any problems with this movie. Like this seems pretty on the nose for what you would think of like any alien encounter. Some of the special effects and the rest of it haven't aged, great. Like you could tell they were still a little primitive, but you and I made comment on that when we talked about the Raiders of the Lost Ark episode that we led off the show with. So,
yes, that's where I'm going with this, which is I have to give it a 7, because this is a film that at the time may have been with special effects cutting edge, but when you're dealing with this level of special effects over time, this was not a film to be done in high def. Okay.
No.
The fact is E.T. looked rubber. Okay. You could tell it was rubber. And when they showed the spaceship, it was like, oh my God, here's a big plastic function with a bunch of plastic lights blinking, and it's
Well,
like,
but
come on.
Even the concept of like the spaceship, it doesn't even like look as creative or whatever else. It basically just looks like a weird Christmas tree ornament.
Yes, or some sort of like uh what's the term I'm looking for? Something that you would sit in the backyard and sit into a it would sit in your backyard, you'd sit on it with the fenced in
Oh, a merry-go-round?
no, it's not a merry-go-round, but um I'm drawing an absolute blank.
I don't know.
But it looks like something that you would have in your backyard, and like you'd invite the neighbors over and you'd sit in the screened-in porch. It didn't look like a spaceship. I mean, what was? I mean, that thing, the little arrow thing on the top. It looked like it should be on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang instead of a sci-fi film.
All right, so that will take us to. Oh no, I guess we never really scored it out. So you said you had a 7 for that.
Yep.
I had an 8.5. I guess we'll average it out in between to a 7.75. Rewatchability.
So it depends. Am I tuning in and catching it in the middle and watching the last half, or am I watching the first half?
So, I put it as a 7. I really don't have any problems with this. This is again one that I would probably show to other people and enjoy watching again. But I don't think it's one I'm actively seeking out because I didn't grow up with it. I think there are people that would have a sentimentality toward it. And so like I'm not gonna knock it down terribly for that either. But it's certainly not it wasn't a problematic rewatch, other than maybe that first half an hour where it's still kind of breaking into the film for me.
Yeah, I had between a 6.5 and a 7.5. I'll go with your 7 for that reason, because it is in between. And again, that's the whole thing. It's a difference between the first half versus the second half, and it is something that I kind of look back at it and go, why did I avoid watching this film for the longest time?
Well, there are plenty of films that are like that for you. So that gives it a final score of 49.7, and that will put it just above Raiders of the Lost Ark for number 9 on the current list.
Wow.
I did forget to mention that part of the reason it got knocked down, it probably would have been a little bit higher, but this only has a 72 audience score.
Really?
Yep.
As popular as it was.
I don't know, and maybe that's a recency thing. That maybe it's exactly your comment of the saccharine, but for whatever reason,
got to be what it is, because it is. And moreover, when you think about it, I mean, can you find any more of a lily white cast? Can you think of one minority in the entire film?
Well, to be fair, like, didn't we go through this last week for Silence of the Lambs? Like, unless you're gonna throw in Morgan Freeman as the next door neighbor.
I mean, the alien in here is an alien.
Okay. So, but all right. So I don't have any other remaining questions. Did you have anything else you wanted to briefly discuss yet?
I know this is in the upper end of the Spielberg filmography.
It's arguably in his top 5. It's minimum in his top 10.
I know, and in retrospect, I love Spielberg. I think Spielberg's great, but I can name, I really love Jaws. I really love Saving Private Ryan. We won't even talk about Schindler's because that is a film that is beyond what you can even describe.
So I think one of these episodes are the ones we could do with specific directors. So Hitchcock, his top 5, Spielberg, and some of these, because this is just it. You start running down the list, I think it would be extremely difficult. It's like picking the top 5 Beatles songs that Catch Me If You Can, Jurassic Park, Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List. I know I'm forgetting probably a ton of these, but E.T., Close Encounters, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the other 2 Indiana Jones films. We won't mention the
Spies.
Bridge of Spies more recently, but he's coming out with West Side Story later this year. He's just got such a filmography that it's hard to compete with. I dare say, even though his run in the last maybe 15 years hasn't been as impressive, it's still that he's okay. But you look at compared to his 70s, 80s, and 90s.
How old is he?
I understand. I'm simply saying he hasn't maintained. No one does. But
you're right, because you get tired. And when you reach the level of success and fame and money that he has, your drive diminishes. You look instead at what he does now, and you realize that, oh my God, you're gonna have a certain production. He produces a dozen eggs, and 1 out of every dozen, maybe every 2 dozen, is a golden egg. And when that happens, you savor it, because you just can't keep up that level of production and concentration and focus that it does in order to achieve what he has done.
All right, so that will be one to potentially revisit at another point. I think we could have an interesting discussion on the inclusion of what would be his top 5 per se, because I think there are several that we probably missed that would deserve potential inclusion. So, all right, but all right. I wish we could chat longer, but I'm expecting a friend for dinner. Please rate, subscribe, and review the podcast. 4 or 5 stars, hopefully, if you enjoyed what we're doing. And make sure you hit the follow in your Spotify, Apple, or whatever feed to get more episodes each week. We've been producing these. This is our 22nd episode. We have our special 25th episode, which I think might go a little long due to the sentimentality on that particular film for both of us. But join us next week for Young Frankenstein. Thank you. Which is currently on Stars, if you have that programming. Otherwise, have a great week, everybody.